Welcome back to Today Extra. We know to avoid fatty foods in our diet, but a new study out of Melbourne has highlighted the impact they can have on our bodies. Scientists have found eating just a few meals consistently high in saturated fats could trigger silent inflammation.
Now, for more on this, we're joined by nutritionist and exercise scientist Amelia Phillips-Mills. So what is this study? What did it find?
Yeah, it's really interesting. So it was a study out of the Walter and Eliza Hall Institute in Melbourne, and what the researchers were quite surprised by was eating high saturated fat diet for just 2 days had such a big negative impact on gut health and really laid the groundwork for gut inflammation as well. And it was particularly around inflammatory marker called interleukin-22 that got compromised by this high saturated fat diet. And so what they then found was that the healthy gut bugs reduced. We saw a decrease in gut permeability as well, or I should say an increase in gut permeability, which is a bad thing. And so all of this meant that we had this groundwork for inflammation, which can be, the foundation for many diseases.
So when they describe it as silent inflammation, what does that actually mean and who's at risk?
Yeah, well, simmering chronic inflammation can be silent, so we can have it and not even realise that we have it. That's why I do always recommend, if people suspect they might have it, to go and get a blood test. You can measure things like HCRP, but there's quite a few inflammatory markers you can have measured, and there's some signs and symptoms as well that you can look out for, like puffy joints, for example, waking up with a lot of brain fog, some gut disturbances, and a few others, but they're the kind of main ones to suggest that there might be some simmering inflammation happening in the background.
So we're talking about really bad foods here. We're talking like naughty foods, right? So your burgers and your crisps and chips and all this sort of stuff?
Not necessarily.
Really?
I mean, saturated fat, and particularly the unhealthy kind of highly processed saturated fat, is in so much of the everyday foods that we eat. Think deli meats, ham, sausages, salami, cakes, biscuits. So you've got to be careful, because you kind of think of this as like that, fried food that we all know is bad, but it can just make its way, meat pies, for example, flaky pastries. So it really can add up the amount of saturated fat that we have in our diet.
Okay, so what are the signs then of like chronic inflammation outside of the silent inflammation?
Yeah, so I guess number one is that blood test, the HCRP, but then also you're looking for things like if you're having allergic reactions or kind of autoimmune impacts. So for example, you might feel like you're getting a bit sniffly or sneezy, you might feel a bit sinusy, then you might find that you're starting to get diagnosed with autoimmune conditions like rheumatoid arthritis, for example, asthma, eczema. So there's some of those signs that there really is something going on, and often it can start in the gut.
There was some good news in this study as well,
Yes,
though?
the great news, and I'm so glad you asked that question, because there is great news, which is just as quickly as our gut health deteriorates with food, it also improves with food. So if we then switch out and we follow an anti-inflammatory diet, then we will see all of this, we'll see these symptoms reducing, and we'll see our body repairing itself, and it can happen at any age, so you're never too old to start repairing your diet, and really it's a really good news story, because you can turn it around quickly.
All right, so then what does an anti-inflammatory diet look like?
Yeah.
All right,
What
so
should we be eating?
What you don't put in your mouth is just as important as what you do put in your mouth. So avoiding all those culprits we just spoke about, then the high saturated fat foods, but then including, really if you think of it blanketly as a Mediterranean style approach, but those dark berries and dark leafy greens as well are packed with
cruciferous vegetables.
Yeah, cruciferous vegetables. You've got your fatty fish as well, really high in antioxidants, nuts and seeds as well. And then you've got some herbs and spices like garlic, turmeric, ginger that are really powerful antioxidants and powerful for reducing inflammation and just having a protective element against, some of those pro-inflammatory
And dark
foods.
chocolate. You don't forget to mention the dark chocolate.
Well, yes, that is a very good news story.
Mum
We
and
love
Dad's
our
treat
dark
on the couch at
chocolate.
night. What about, we were talking to a friend this morning about this, about like nightshades. So that's your tomatoes and your onions, stuff like that.
Yeah.
Are they going to inflame your gut too? Are they bad? Because some people say they are, some people don't care.
So if you don't have issues with histamine, then go for it. Eggplant, I mean, they're all so good for you, capsicum. But if you've been tested for histamine and you've got issues with histamine and quite high elevated levels of histamine, which is inflammatory, then reducing those nightshades can be helpful. But don't do it if you don't have a histamine issue, because there's lots of nutrients in
What
those
if you're
nightshades.
really fit? Would you even notice that you're having this sort of silent inflammation if you're eating these.
No,
fatty
it's
foods.
silent. This is the
So
thing.
that's why you have to get a
the-
blood test.
Yeah, the thousands of people that I see, so many of them had no idea. When we measured their inflammatory markers, they had no idea. Once it's been going on for a long time, that's when you start to see those issues arise, such as those autoimmune. Often people are diagnosed with an autoimmune condition, like, suddenly they've got Hashimoto's, or suddenly, they could eat anything and now they've got gut disturbances. Celiac, eczema. That's usually a sign that you've been carrying this inflammation for a while and the body's triggered and it's gone, now we're going to freak out at a lot of the foods that you're eating. Wow. So that's why it's good to test early and to keep a track of it over the years.
Well, that's really good information, Mil. It's great to have you in today.
Thank you.
Thanks, Amelia.
All right, still to come on